The guiding question for Aristotle's inquiry into ethical principles is, what is the best life for a human being? And he begins in book one by looking through various possibilities that other people have considered for what the best life might be, and sort of thinking through, sorting through why he thinks one or the other might or might not be the best life. Now, I've titled this slide "The 3=4 Lives" because even though the heading of the subchapter, which was added later by an editor, says the 3 lives, Aristotle then actually goes on to talk about 4. Here on page 4, he says, "But let us again begin from the point from which we digressed. There are roughly 3 most favored lives: the lives of gratification, of political activity, and third, of study." So the life of gratification, he means a life that's devoted to pleasure, especially to the pleasures of the body. The life of political activity we'll talk about in some detail. And of course, the life that he has chosen and that his students have chosen is basically the life of study. We'll begin by looking at, on page 5, what he calls the political life, or the life of political activity. That's the same as the life of honor. He uses those 2 terms interchangeably. So let's read what's here. "But the cultivated people, those who are active in politics, conceive the good as honor, since this is more or less the end," meaning the goal, "that is normally pursued in the political life." So what that means is, to be a politician means your power lies in your reputation. People vote for you because you have a particular reputation, and that voting and your influence is based on that reputation. It's based on your honor, your record, what people think of your character, and so on and so forth. But then at the second sentence here, let's read that. "This, however, appears to be too superficial to be what we're seeking." In other words, too superficial to be the best life for a human being, "for it seems to depend more on those who honor than on those who are honored, whereas we intuitively believe that the good is something of our own and hard to take from us." Now, how do we get that idea into our own words? Well, start at the end of the sentence. If we could find a form of life that is more within our control, it would probably be superior to one where our life and our thriving was more in someone else's control. And Aristotle's point here is that it's doubtful that the life of the politician is the best life for a human being, because, in fact, we don't control our own reputation. What happens with reputation? Well, sometimes a very good person has a very good reputation. They get exactly the reputation they deserve. But it's also possible, through a sort of good marketing and good spin, for a not very good person to have a fantastic reputation and be politically very successful. I'm not mentioning any particular politicians right now. You may be able to think of some on your own. And the point, it's also possible for a very good person to be attacked. Someone else tells lies about them and manipulates their reputation. So you can end up with a very good person who ends up with a very bad reputation, and their political career is ended. And so our reputation is largely outside of our control. Again, Aristotle thinks maybe that's not the best life for a human being. If we can find a life where our happiness and our thriving is within our own control, that would be superior to the life of the politician. But the last part is interesting. So here, after paragraph 5, further, it would seem they, that is, pursue honor to convince themselves that they're good. At any rate, they seek to be honored by prudent people among those who know them, and for virtue, it is clear then that in their view, at any rate, virtue is superior to honor. So Aristotle is doubtful about the political life, but as at its best, a politician is someone who is a good person who wants to gain a good reputation. They want to gain a justifiably good reputation for being a virtuous person, and they want that reputation to come from virtuous people. So Aristotle says, even in that best case, where the political reputation is high and the virtue is also high, it seems like this person is putting virtue above honor. Aristotle looks at the moneymaker's life, the merchant or the person who organizes their life around money. And I won't read this aloud to you, but his point about someone who centers their life around money is that no one actually ever does this, right? So he talks about wealth as being what we call in philosophy instrumental. Instrumental meaning it's not good for its own sake. It's a good because it's a means to something else. And Aristotle thinks wealth is exactly that way, that no one actually spends their lives pursuing wealth. We only pursue wealth ultimately for what wealth can bring to us, whether that's possessions or friends or security, whatever it is. But we're not pursuing wealth for its own end. And so the best life for a human being could not possibly be pursuing wealth as an end in itself, as its own ultimate goal of life, because it would be irrational for someone to pursue that. You'd be King Midas, right? Who would wish for everything to turn to gold. And he would turn his food to gold, and he would turn his daughter. He turns his daughter to gold, right? So that's not the kind of life that we would want. Okay, so then I wanted to come back here and show you the right side of this board. The left side is the one I was really talking about in the last video. So clearly, when we're talking about the life of pleasure, what Aristotle writes about here is the life of gratification. This is the kind of life that Epicureans advocate with some qualification. But the problem with a life devoted solely to pleasure is that it does not satisfy the rational part of the human being, who, remember, is both rational and political for Aristotle. Maybe it would satisfy the political dimension of our species in the sense that, you can definitely socialize around the enjoyment of pleasure, but it doesn't satisfy the rational part of the human soul. At the same time, Aristotle is going to turn out to be pro-pleasure, not as the ultimate goal of human life, but as a very important factor of human life for a number of different reasons. And number two, we talked about that. Number three, I just wanted to add on the life of honor that the paradigm, the model of honor in Aristotle's time is the Greek warrior. Someone like Achilles or Odysseus, right? Achilles, who sort of wins through brute force and by being this, tall, beautiful, strong guy who is very violent. And Odysseus is a different kind of hero who wins through stealth. He's smart and sneaky. But both Achilles and Odysseus are heroes in wartime. So the life of honor, the paradigm of the life of honor in Aristotle's time is either Homer's hero Achilles or his hero Odysseus from either the Iliad or the Odyssey. And it's interesting because children in ancient Athens would fight over whether Achilles or Odysseus was the greater warrior. And probably the smarter ones and the smaller ones thought that Odysseus was the greater warrior, and the bigger, taller, maybe the dumb jock types, for lack of a better term, thought that Achilles was the better warrior. This model of the warrior, as the most honorable person in the society, as the real hero, is problematic in Aristotle's time, because in Aristotle's time, Athens is in the midst of a period of peace. And the kinds of virtues that you need for a peaceful society are different from the virtues that you need for a society in wartime. So that's one of the tensions that was going on in Aristotle's time. The fourth, the life of contemplation, same as the life of study. The problem with the life of study, even though Aristotle mentions the life of study in a very positive light, and it's the life that, for all intents and purposes, he has chosen for himself, and some of his students have chosen. Some of them will also go on to be politicians. But despite the fact that Aristotle has chosen the life of contemplation for himself, he does not think about it as the highest life. Why not? Because the life of study, it satisfies the rational part of human existence, but it doesn't satisfy the political dimension of our humanity, because the life of contemplation involves a withdrawal from the world into solitude. And you can't really fulfill your social and political nature if you've withdrawn into solitude. So Aristotle is going to end up concluding that the best life for a human being, the true goal of life, is happiness, right? This is not terribly surprising. Kant is one of the few philosophers who thought that happiness could not be the end goal of human life. But we have to be careful, because for Aristotle, happiness is not first and foremost about pleasure. So Aristotle's meaning of the term happiness is going to be very, very different from John Stuart Mill's meaning of what happiness is. And I've put on the screen here what I think of actually as the best way of talking about what happiness is for Aristotle. So St. Irenaeus was a Christian bishop in Greece in the 2nd century, lived just into the 3rd century AD. And he said, the glory of God is the human being fully alive. And I've always loved that statement. You'll see it sometimes on banners around campus ministry, and mission and ministry, the division of mission and ministry, and their vice president love this quotation as sort of encapsulating what Jesuit education is about, that we want to make a human being fully alive. That's the kind of human being we want to graduate. That's exactly what Aristotle is looking for, is what kind of life would be completely fulfilling for the human person. We don't have to go into exactly what Aristotle means by saying happiness is the end goal of life, and the best form of life is the one that's spent in pursuit of happiness. And of course, he's going to have to tell us what he thinks is the form of life that is going to get us to the goal of happiness, because that just tells us what the goal is, this complete thriving, but it hasn't yet told us how it is, what specific form of life is going to lead to that thriving, is going to lead to the human person fully alive. And so we'll talk about that in the next video. It turns out to be virtue.